All right, so Pascal said, love your content. If you can do a video about how can I have a final grade that looks good on all devices, from OLED to phone, laptop, is there a way to make sure it's overall the same everywhere? Because it looks so different after grade on all devices. This is a real problem and it's only getting worse because I like to watch everything on my calibrated $6,000 77-inch Sony's flagship TV. That's not the case with my little brother. He watches Game of Thrones while his phone is locked to portrait mode on his phone on a 3-inch screen across. I don't even know how wide iPhone screen is across, but he's watching it on that screen, Game of Thrones. And then you got a friend of mine who is a professional photographer who actually uses Lightroom and grades his photos on sometimes $100 consumer monitor. So how do we know that if I grade something here, it's going to look good on my friend's $100 monitor, my brother's iPhone, and then my $30,000 monitor or my $6,000 OLED TV? And that's exactly what we're going to be covering in this video. And before we do me a favor, smash the like button on this video so we can trick the algorithm and help many more people find out a solution to this specific problem.
All right, so let's start with the first method, which is pretty obvious, using our scopes. So this is going to be our first way to make sure that the image looks proper based on this, and then we can assume and hope that it's going to look good everywhere else. But how do we know what's right and what's wrong? And those are the few things that I want to show you and take you through while using scopes. So right now we're using our 4-up. You can change the formation to 1 or 9 scopes, whatever you want, okay? But pretty common one is a 4-up, especially if you're going to be using one main screen and then you're going to have your reference monitor that I have right here. So this is set to parade. It's basically telling me my red, green, and blue channels separately so I can really see what's happening in the image. So just let's just say I'm not even a colorist, and if I'm looking at this and I'm going, well, what's happening with my colors in my image? And I go, it looks a little green, right? Like that's the terminology that my mom would use. And if I look at my parade, I'm seeing that the green is lifted up. So up means more of that thing, more of that color. And here we can see that the green is up and then the blue and then the red is pretty suppressed, okay? And that's what we're seeing here. So that's like one indication that the scope is giving us. Now, the thing with scopes is that it's very like zeros and ones. It's not necessarily like something how a human would detect what's happening. See, like I had to look at the image and go, oh, it's green, right? Like this would have been very difficult, especially if you don't know how to read scopes to make sense of what you're looking at. So this could be daunting for new people. Right here, I have waveform, and the thing that I will change here, usually this is really good for our overall exposure and where we want to keep our image. So if we look at the waveform, we're seeing that the overall image is pretty lifted. And based on this, I can tell now by looking at my image that, oh, that's right, like it looks pretty bright. And you see, nothing is touching 0, and it's very close to the top right here. So that gets to tell us that overall image is pretty lifted. But the key point when using your waveform and an ultimate game changer is clicking right here and then changing that to under your Y channel, just change that to colorize and look at what just happened. Now, remember I said the overall image is sitting a little bit toward green, and I was trying to be not a colorist and look at it as like, you know, somebody who wouldn't know anything about color grading, but it still looks green. And now our colorized waveform is telling us just that. And remember, it was more difficult to figure that out looking at our parades, but waveform, colorized waveform just made it black and white. It's green, like we're seeing that green. Okay, that newly found data is amazing. What do we do with it, right? So like that's going to be the next step. I'm going to show you how we're going to correct it. Then down here in our vector scope, This basically tells us about our saturation and the balance of our image. Great tool to adjust your balance. But how do you adjust your balance? What do you do with it? Well, the simple idea is that the main meat of my image, like this little, blob, if I can get this right in the center in the crosshair, my image is going to be balanced. So see, this is pretty good. But once again, it's missing the human effect, that thing, that the intuition that we need to know what's right and what's wrong. Because if I just make a change based on this, my skin might just get too magenta, and that's not where I want to put my skin. So what can we do about it? Well, another great thing that we have in our vector scope is you can click on this right here, and then just check under additional gamut, just check show skin tone indicator. As soon as I do that, this line appears. That is our general skin tone indicator, where the skin tones should be sitting. Now, skin tones range all over the place. If somebody is really pale, they might have really pink pigmentation, and then they will not be sitting on this line. They will actually be leaning toward right. If we're talking about somebody from Italy or Asia, they might have olive, in their undertones, and then they're going to be sitting more toward green and not in the middle. Okay, so that is very important to understand. Somebody from Mexico might be right in the dead center. Okay, so that's just you gain that experience when you again, if you're new to color grading, how the hell would you know all that? And that's what I mean. Using your scopes is not as simple as well, duh, just use your scopes. What are you looking for? How do you know what's what? Where do you need to be? That's what's so important. So what I'm going to do is, let's just say based on all of our data that we collected, I'm going to create a new node. I'm going to put it right here. We're going to call it balance exposure. Okay. And we're going to put it right here. So what was the first thing that we said? We said the image is too green. So we want to take out some green, right? But then we said we're going to use our vector scope, and if this blob, it gets in the center, our image is going to start looking good. And then we're going to use the skin indicator line and just try to keep her somewhere around a little bit of the magenta side, because she is Caucasian. So keeping all those things in mind, how about we just start with our offset? Offset is the tool that helps you move your entire image in one direction. Because if I use my lift, you'll see what happens. Okay, if I use my lift, I'm only affecting the bottom part of my image. Okay, if I use my gamma, I'm affecting the middle part of my image, and if I'm using my gain, I'm affecting only the top part of my image, right? So offset, on the other hand, it doesn't do twist and turn. It just takes the entire thing and moves it in whichever quadrant you want it, which makes it very simple to let's just say grabbing this blob and putting it in the center. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab it from here and start moving it in a little bit like that. And now I'm also looking at my image too, and I'm cheating. I'm looking at my professional monitor. This just looks like dead on. This looks really, really good. Also, one thing you have to keep in mind is that she's in the tunnel, right? And these lights tend to run a little green. With age, they tend to add a little bit of green tint. So we don't want to completely take that out. So you see how I'm going into that white. So look at the whitest part, right? This waveform right here is showing us her shoes. And look at what we did to her shoes. If I just go right here, and if I just do before and after, we can clearly see we made the shoes basically pure white. And then we see what's happening here. And then we see what's happening here. There was a lot of green there, and now it's getting really good. Now, if it has hints of magenta around here, it should, because this light is emitting on it. So it should have that. Well, what's happening with the skin? If we go to the skin, click on these three dots and then turn on display qualifier focus. Then that way, when you hover over, it will tell you what's being affected on your vector scope and on your scopes in general. So right here, we look at the skin, and the skin is literally where we wanted it. See, like I said, I would like for it to be a little bit toward magenta, and it's right dead in the center. And let's just say we are compensating just a little bit because of the environment she is in. And remember, I said the lights have a little bit of like green tinge, which means it's going to subtract a little bit of like that magenta that should be in her skin and then put her right in the middle of our skin tone indicator. And this is basically telling us we're ending up in a really good place. Now, what does that have to do with, iPhone having a little bit of warmth and then iPad leaning a little bit on the cooler side and then my $30,000 monitor being perfect and my $5,000 or $6,000 Sony flagship TV right here also being very close to my $30,000 monitor? Well, the thing that they all have in common is that once I do this and make sure that my image is unbiased and it is basically sitting where it's supposed to be and my scopes are telling me this is how it should be, then from device to device, it should be in the similar ballpark. Okay. I mean, we will still be reliant on the device that we're looking at, but now imagine if our image was like this, right? And then now this goes on the iPhone. iPhone will add so much more warmth and green to it, whereas maybe on the iPad, it will balance it out a little bit. And then on my $30,000 monitor, it's just going to look green. So you see like how it turns into a disaster. Whereas here, we are just closing that gap, right? We're just using objective tools to close that gap. And at this point, we can bring the exposure down a little bit if we want to, or we can just like leave it there. So a couple of ways to like handle the exposure. My favorite way is the HDR palette because our offset here works like if we were to switch stops in camera. And then it has an exposure right here and it responds to that. So like if I were to just bring it down about half a stop and I put it right here, to me, just to my eyes, it looks pretty good. Like it started to get some meat, right? So like if we go before and we go after, I mean, it's such a massive difference. Like we just ended up with such a beautiful image. And all we did is just read our scopes. And again, I was trying really hard not to act like a pro colorist and just see it as like we're solving a puzzle one step at a time. And that's where we ended up. Now I want to show you a second method that has been my go-to method, and it still is because it always lives on this screen. And of course, I'm talking about Nobe Omniscope. This thing is so powerful, like worth every single cent. I mean, they make such a killer product and you can customize the hell out of it however you want. And this just takes your scopes to like an 11. Like this is just like scopes on steroids. So a couple of things that I want to highlight here. I don't want to do a review on this tool right now, but I want to highlight a few things like basically where our scopes end and then this picks up. So one of the really cool features here is that we have our false color setup here. So now this can just tell me where my exposure should be. And we are seeing that the exposure is in a really good place. I mean, just like look at this gray in her cheek right here or under her chin. And then she has a little bit, so the skin should be technically around here. This is our perfect exposure. But now it depends on who are we talking about. If somebody is talking about my skin, it should be right around 50. If we're talking about Caucasian skin, it's going to be around 60 or 70. It's going to be up there. If we're talking about darker skin, it's going to fall to 40 or 30. So right here, all the mixed lighting and everything that's happening in the environment, this is absolutely perfect. And if I were to go here and undo this and then come back here and look at it, now we're just adding tons of like yellow. We're basically blowing out the highlights and the skin and everything. And what that does is that it takes away, it just makes your entire image very thin and you lack that detail, that oomph, like that thing that we see and we go, oh my God, this looks so good. And you saw we just made tiny changes and we made global changes. We didn't do anything granular. And that's just like a side note pro tip. Anytime you're balancing your image, always stick with like global, broader changes. So going back to our Nobe, another thing that I absolutely love about it is this right here. Now, somebody can argue that, hey, you can do the same thing with like your 9 up here. Well, then it will end up taking so much space and it's still not as granular and advanced as like what we can see here. So what's happening here is that I have my global vector scope, and then I have my vector scope broken into lows, mids, and highs. And I absolutely love this because now this can further help me dial in my image, because on paper, this looked good. We were happy, blah, blah, blah. And remember I said the way I balanced the image, I wanted to leave a little bit of green in the highlights, in the lights. And that's exactly what we accomplished here. And this basically pinpoints it and tells us exactly that's what's happening here. And then it's telling us what's happening on our low end. So what if we want our low end to be a little bit more balanced? Or what if we want to play with our image a little bit and we want our gamma to be a little bit more balanced and still leave the lights to have a little bit of green in there? Then what I can do is I can just basically go in my image and in my gamma. So let's go right here. And I can just start like basically grabbing the image and start moving it up to something like that. And if I go back in there, so let's just do, for the example's sake, a little bit like that. You see, like now I'm moving this over while I'm still keeping the green in there. So this helps me really hone in and dial in and control those little bits and pieces that we didn't see here, because this was just giving us the overall picture. Okay. And then this helped us like really dial it in. So like you saw, false color gave us a lot more assurance to like where our exposure should be. And then this just makes it that much more accurate, where we're just closing that gap of like seeing it from one screen to the next, like bringing it even closer, because we're not leaving anything up to interpretation. That's exactly what's happening here. And then lastly, I absolutely love this feature with Omniscope, where you can set one to monochromatic or black and white. So this is just giving us our black and white image. And by looking at this image, I just knew that it was lacking contrast. I was just looking at it and I'm like, man, I wish I can just add a little bit more punch. It just doesn't have the punch. So now when I actually see this, I go, oh, that's exactly right. Like it doesn't have that punch. So to add that, there's a couple of different ways to do it. If we want to just like, for the example's sake, like do it the easy way, I can take my pivot and pull it close to 3.4-ish and 0.34. What 0.34 does is that it's basically locking it in around here at our 18% gray, which means that now if I take my contrast and move it around, my skin stays intact where it's supposed to be, and then everything else moves above and under it, right? So we're not actually making our image, overall image, darker. We're just leaving the meat, the actual exposure, the perfect, let's just say 50% as is, and then we're making changes above and under it, okay? And if you guys are interested in seeing a specific video on like what I'm talking about, and go a little bit deeper into the contrast, like I would love to do that. Just let me know in the comments. Anyway, so this is where we are now. And now if I go and I look at my black and white image compared to before, there is a pretty big difference. And that's what we're seeing. Like once you start seeing like, okay, now this looks really good, then it doesn't matter. We could be looking at it on my friend's $100 consumer monitor or my brother's iPhone or my $30,000 monitor. We're just going to have a very healthy image. And these were the things that were lacking with Resolve's free solution. And then finally, I want to talk about the tool that I literally cannot live without anymore. And I'm hearing so much positive feedback about it as well. And that is my own tool that I created. It's called Qazi's Toolkit QT Charts. And once you activate this, the crazy thing about this tool is that it is going to give us indications that are a lot more how our brain and eyes work. So let's just start with the first one, which is the skin hue indicator. So as soon as I click right here, all of a sudden it's basically telling us, first of all, where you put this is very important. And always put it near your ODT, especially when you're doing QC output monitoring. So it tells you output monitoring. These are the tools that we're like right now concerned with. So for that, I click right here and I look at what is happening with my skin. And it's telling us that if it's showing red dots, that means it's a little bit, toward magenta. And if it's showing green, then it's a little bit toward green. And if it's okay, then it's like a perfect skin tone. And remember, I said we want to go a little bit toward magenta. And that's exactly what's happening, right? And now we can attest to it. So obviously, we did a pretty good job using our intuition. But let's just say that if you don't have that, because you're just starting out and you don't have that command over your balance, this tool will just make it black and white. This will make it so simple to just nail it, because you're just going to be here. And let's just say if I go somewhere like this and I go, oh my God, this is looking too green. What do I have to do? And I'll just keep going here, here, here until I end up with something like this. And I'll go, oh, let's turn it off and let's see what it looks like. So you see how easy that was? So I'm just going to undo that and go back to what we had. But you just saw how easy it was to just kind of look at the skin, get it in the ballpark. Everything else will fall into place. We have our false color here, which I absolutely love. I love it more than what you can get. And you have a bunch of different presets to choose from in Omniscope. So no shade on that, but I feel like what we created here is just a lot more expressive and makes it even easier to really know what's going on, what you need to do. And then the most exclusive feature here is Sat False Color. Now that is an ultimate game changer. That is a tool that I have not seen anywhere else. And this is basically telling us our saturation levels. And this is super, super important, because once your stuff starts going out to any and every screen, you will be blown away, because your grandma's TV might be set to vivid. And then if you're actually pushing your saturation here on that TV, it's just going to blow out. It's going to look freaking crazy. So right now what I'm looking at is what we ideally want to do with our skin is that we want to keep it somewhere from 0.45 to 0.9 on the very, very pushed Barbie level. But we don't want to go past that. And what I'm seeing right now is that my skin is basically living between these. So I am super happy. This right here, I know for a fact that no matter where it goes, I am covered. Everything is great. But just for the example's sake, if I go here and let's just say, if I really wanted to push my image and I did something like that, I was just really going for it, or let's just say if I was working on an uncalibrated monitor and it was showing something wrong and I was just pushing my image, now I can look at it using this scope and go, what the hell is going on? We're almost getting into the red or the magenta category. And magenta basically means that it's not going to be legal for broadcast purposes. So we're basically just in uncharted territory. We have to dial it back. And we wouldn't know it if we're looking at this, because now I'm looking at this and I'm going, actually, it kind of looks cool. I'm not going to lie. It actually looks pretty good. But then if I come here and I'm looking at what's happening with her skin, I mean, this much saturation in the skin, maybe you have something super red or neon in the image, like what's happening right here. This could live there because it's supposed to be the most colorful thing in the image, and it's bursting out with just all the different hues that we have in there, but not on your skin, because this is going to look so awful when you're just looking at a bad screen or uncalibrated screen or whatever have you. So with this tool, it's really just telling us where it's supposed to be. And I'm just going to undo that and go back to what we had before. And now I want to show you one more tool, but for that, what we have to do is we have to hit E, break this up, put it before we do our balance. And here, I'm just going to turn on gradient chart and I'm going to put it in full screen. What this is telling us is the fidelity of our image. And what I mean by that is that this right now, the overall gradient chart is looking pretty smooth, because if I take that saturation and put it back to where it was, remember when I said, let's just set it to 80, look at what's happening with our image now and how broken it is. And how just one big red blob it became right here, compared to if we go back and look at this and look at, we can't even make out what's happening here. And whereas here we're seeing every single stage and level, everything is separated. So this is an absolutely incredible tool to just tell us, hey man, when are we going too far with our look? Or just even balance. Where are we going? What do we need to do to kind of pull back from that? So I'm just going to go and undo this. But these are the three main methods that I will use. And what I personally do is this. I have my omniscopes on this screen right here, always. Okay, so these are up there all the time. I will have this when I'm shooting a tutorial for you guys, and I'll have this available. And most of the time, I'll just look at this. I don't even look at that. I look at that when I just like really go, let's just get in there and be granular. And then I will always be using my QT charts. And you guys have seen that in the videos that I've been using this, whether we're doing a reaction video and we're really breaking apart like professional grades, or I'm working on something where I want to do quick shot matching or something like that. I'm relying on QT charts. So I will say, really, it's not like one or the other. If you really want to supercharge your process and make sure to avoid any sort of discrepancy when it comes to like going from device to device and have a very cohesive, very confident look, which is going to look good, guaranteed from device to device, you pretty much need this entire like setup to make that happen.
So there you have it. If you enjoyed this video, it will mean the world to me if you smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you can be notified about our future content. If you're interested in Nobe Omniscope or QT charts, link to both are going to be in the description below. I will see you in the next one. Peace, fam.